Welcome to My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 437. This program is in merit of Baruch ben Yamin ben Menucha Lana and Miriam bas Chaya Sarah Altais, Kusil ben Leah Rochel and Rochel bas Liba Farkash, and dedicated by Pinchas Todris and Ben Miriam and Sarah bas Rochel Altais. Being that tonight is Chof Beis Shevat, the 22nd of Shvat, we'll begin with that. It's the 35th yard site, 35 years from the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushke's passing in the year Tovshin Mem Ches Chof Beis Shevat. Those of us old enough to remember that day, sad day, a day that had a deep impact on the Rebbe going forward, which was so visible and palpable. And it remains etched in our minds and our beings, being that the Rebbe and Rebbetzin, partners in life, partners in the Deir HaShvi, was so very significant. I remember, on a personal note, after the Rebbe came back from the Lubavitch and came home, we sat Shiva. So he spoke a few words about Nichem Avelim, that though there are different customs, some don't come to visit and to console until the third day, some don't come till the second day, some in the first day, but now, due to especially that it's Avis Yisrael, you have to proceed and do it as early as possible because it's part of Avis Yisrael. Rebbe spoke about it as someone who had the merit to prepare these sichos for publication. So I wrote up the Rebbe's words, but I didn't know if the Rebbe was going to edit it or not edit it. I felt also uncomfortable, the Rebbe sitting Shiva. So I decided I'll type it up on one page, and being that it went over on the second page, instead of making two separate pages, which we usually would do, I made it back to back. So it'd be one page and easier. And I gave it to the secretary, and I said, if you have a megalkeit, if you think there's an opportunity, and the Rebbe may want to edit it, here it is. I didn't want to push it as because again, the circumstances. Anyway, within a half hour, I believe, I get a call to come to President Street, the Rebbe edited it. And it's interesting that in that type of moment, you think the Rebbe, he immersed himself. When he spoke literally different halachas, the tashbats. He brought sources. It was quite awesome to see. Anyway, when the Rebbe edited it, so because we're not accustomed to giving the Rebbe anything back to back on one page, the Rebbe wrote on top that kenira, that appears that you're missing something that I said. And then the Rebbe realized that it was written on the other side, so he crossed out what he wrote initially, that he had said it, because we actually did write it. I felt bad a bit because the Rebbe had to look on the other side, but I thought it was the easiest way to go. Anyway, this is printed now. Now we have this, the words that the Rebbe wrote, and the Rebbe said, and the Rebbe wrote and edited. Just a little, another interesting note to make. Every year, in the later years, when it was the Rebbe's anniversary, Untitled Chapter, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin were married Tof Reish Pei Tes. So in the early years, people Chassidim knew, but it was not necessarily in Tovshin Yudalad, which was 25 years from Pei Tes, Tovshin Pei Tes, Sadik Tes, Tovshin Tes. And the Rebbe spoke about it, and that's when the Rebbe said his famous Chodedi, and then later edited it. And the same thing in Tovshin Chof Tes, which was 40 years for Pei Tes. The Rebbe spoke about it, there was a whole blessing. But after that, every year, the Chassidim would go and give a Rebbe a blessing. In Tovshin Lamed Tes, which would have been 60 years, the 60th year from Pei Tes, Tovshin Lamed Tes, the 50th year, the 50th year from Pei Tes. So Chassidim went in to the Rebbe Gan Eden Tachten. They gave the Rebbe a bracha. The Rebbe responded, of course, with a bracha. And they said that we have here some people who were there at the actual wedding 50 years ago. So the Rebbe said we should be zeichet to come to the 60th year. 60th year was Tovshin Memtes, already after the histalkus. So that year, because the Rebbe said be zeichet to go to the 60th year, they decided instead of waiting till Tovshin Memtes, they went in Tovshin Memches, the beginning of the 60th year, to bless the Rebbe and Yud Kislev, him and the Rebbetzin. The Rebbetzin was still here. It was before Chof Beis Shevat, Yud Kislev. And the Rebbe gave a bracha, a very short bracha, and we prepared it. The Rebbe always would edit these things, but he did not edit it. He gave it in a second time. I remember I asked Rabbi Groner, he said it's on top by the Rebbe. Even when it got a little lower in the pile, he put it on top. The Rebbe never edited it. Within a few months, this was Kislev, Teves Shvat, 2 months later, Chof Beis Shevat, he had a sense of perhaps why the Rebbe didn't edit it, that bracha. And interesting that was they never really zeicha, the Rebbetzin was never zeicha in the Shoma Beguf to celebrate the full 60th anniversary. Just a few interesting points to make. I once heard from one of the Mesharsim, one of the people who helped out in the Rebbe in the Rebbetzins house, that the Rebbe once came home on Yud Kislev, and usually when they would hear the Rebbe put the key in the door, the Mesharis would go and he would open the door for the Rebbe. This time the Rebbetzin was the first to open it. The Mesharis ended up being a little behind her. When the Rebbe walked in, he saw the Rebbe, he said, Mazel Tov. Both his hands up, Mazel Tov. And then the Rebbe noticed him, and the Rebbe subdued, I guess, his tone. He felt so uncomfortable because it was such a personal moment between him and the Rebbe. That was a Yud Kislev story. But to just see the connection, even though it wasn't so apparent and so blatant, but Melech and a Malka, a king and a queen, Malka b'lei matranisa is not complete. And we saw it visibly after the histalkus, how it affected the Rebbe. Me a day, we are not people who know what's going on, but there's no question there was something that really had deep impact. And you see the Rebbe moved his whole operation to the house for a year, besides davening 3 times a day. Every farbreng and v'achayit nalibe. I mean, the Rebbe was very openly grieving. It was very, very clear. And I always wondered, because in Tovshin Chofei, when the Rebbe's mother, Rebbetzin Chana, passed away, relatively speaking, things were very discreet. And here the Rebbe was almost like going out of the way to make it very clear that something happened. The farbrengens changed structure. After Pesach that year, Tovshin Memches, 35 years ago, the Rebbe stopped speaking Rashi Siches, stopped the Zoyar, Pirkei Yovos, the Rambam. All the things the Rebbe did was so precious to the Rebbe. Maimorim stopped at the end of Tovshin Memches. The Rebbe stopped saying Maimorim. He said a few individual Maimorim after that, but not regularly. And we are not here to explain. The farbrengens became shorter, different style. But clearly it was an impact. I always wondered why the Rebbe felt importance to make it clear to us. So we know that Tzemach Tzedek is a similar situation. Tzemach Tzedek, also the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushke passed away before he did. 5 years earlier, in Tofresh Chof Aleph. And the Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, passed away in Tofresh Chavov. And there too it had a deep impact on the Tzemach Tzedek. Yechida stopped, Maimorim stopped, to the point that Chassidim came to the Rebbe and said, the Rebbe, we need you. And the Rebbe said, Ein melech b'lei matranisa. A king is not a king without his queen. And they brought a Maimer Chazal that the queen is Torah. And he didn't accept that. So there were many similarities. So again, we don't know how these things work. We know the idea of Zoh and Malchus in Atzilus, how they are together, they are one union, and one unit, and one connection. But I'm here not to analyze it, just to comment on it, because clearly Chof Beis Shevat has that type of effect. At the same time, the Rebbe turned, like everything, into a positive. Chof Beis Shevat, if you look at the Sicha, a kuntras that came out in Tovshin Nun Beis, was at the 4th yahrzeit of the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushke. So the Sikha came out B'cha Yivorech Yisrael, because the Rebbe emphasized on the word B'cha. Chof Beis is the letters B'cha, and the Rebbe said, just to read straight from the Sikha, he says Chof Beis Shevat, Chof Beis B'Chedesh is verbunden mit Berachos, connected to blessing. V'merum is in the Misper Chof Beis, hinted to in the letter number 22. Is B'cha. And what is Merames? B'cha Yivorech Yisrael. Das heißt, das ist a Tag, was von ihm, durch ihm und mit ihm, werden Iden gebencht in alle Seerinyonim. It's a day that from that day, through that day, and with that day, Jews get blessed in all their needs. Because Chof Beis, he goes on to explain, is the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So it covers the entire spectrum of everything possible blessing that a person can come and need. That's what he goes on to explain. It's a very powerful sikh and definitely worth reading. Connection to Chof Beis Shevat tonight, tomorrow. Goes on to explain what the number of 22 is twice Yud Aleph, the Tkufis. I mean, you see clearly that he connects the day to the whole era, the whole period of the seventh generation, starting from Yud Shevat, Tovshin Yud, and then Tovshin Yud Aleph, and Yud Aleph Shvat, and Yud Aleph Nisan, and Chof Beis is twice Yud Aleph. Talks about how it is part of the whole process, and especially in the last stage right before Geula, twice Yud Aleph, and Yud Aleph itself is higher than say the histalkus. With Yud Shevat, Tovshin Yud, all representing the completion of a cycle. Yud Aleph represents that which is beyond the cycle. Gili, and twice Yud Aleph, Chof Beis, represents coming of the Geula Amitis Vashlema. The Rebbe also explains beautifully the Rebbetzins name, how it's connected to the whole concept of making a dira b'tachtenim chaye mushkin, that a dira, a home, is not just a home, but it should be a beautiful home. A dira noah, a beautiful home. And a beautiful home is chaya, which means filled with vitality and life, and mushka, which is from the word musak, which is a reach teiv, beautiful aroma. And the Rebbe explains those two elements. So you see from this sikha in Tovshin Nun Beis, in connection to Chof Beis Shevat, the Rebbe speaks about the Rebbetzin in this global sense, see clearly connected to the Rebbe's own shlichus. So in a positive way, we know that the Yom of a Yortzeit, the histalkus, as the Alter Rebbe says, is a day when all the Aveda, everything that person did, all gathers together and elevates above, and then comes and drawn down below. Peil Yeshua's Bekedav Haaretz. It affects redemptions and salvations, Bekedav Haaretz, in the abyss, in the depths, in the midst of the very earth of our lives. So as much as on one hand there was a certain, obviously, a sadness, and as we saw the effect, but at the same time it's also this very powerful day, B'cha Yivorech Yisrael, one that's filled with blessings and brings us blessings. So that's just a general statement about what we can derive from Chof Beis Shevat. And it's a day that goes hand in hand with the Rebbe, and in the sense of all the roles and mission of our generation of Deir HaShvi comes together on Chof Beis Shevat. More specifically, I'll just tell a story again. It's not Chof Beis Shevat, it's interesting stories with the Rebbetzin. Beautiful story I heard. I'll tell two stories that I heard. One is I heard this from, I could say his name, he's Olav Hasholm already, Yosef Tevel. He was a young boy in Crown Heights during the summer. So he was one of those that remained here. His family was here for the summer. And he once was standing in front of 770, and the Rebbetzin drove up. She was going to see her mother, who was living in the Rebbetzin Chamedina on the second floor of 770. And she came with bags. She had apparently gone shopping. And the bochim would all run all over the place, away. But he was a kid. He went over to the Rebbetzin and offered to help her. So she gave him one of the bags, and he walked with her. They came to the elevator. She noticed that he had a cast on his hand. He had broken his arm, and he had a cast, a plaster cast. So she said to him, you don't need to bother. But he insisted. Went up with her in the elevator upstairs, a little boy. And the Rebbetzin went into the apartment with her bags, and she said to him, wait here for a minute. She came back with a big chocolate. You know those chocolate coins, a big roll of chocolate coins that you get for Shalach Monas. And she gives it to him. And he had the chutzpah, he says to Rebbetzin, "Bestame weißt du nicht, aber ich komme von a chassidische Heim. You may not know, but I come from a chassidische home, und uns hat man aufgehoben. And they educated us. Aber shas metut ha-teva fara'iden, when you do a favor for a Jew, nem nicht kenopzo. You don't take payment for it. It was self from the Rebbetzin, especially from the Rebbetzin." He said the Rebbetzin gave him a smile from ear to ear. Broad smile. And said, "Dacht sich mir, als ich komme von a chassidische Heim." Dacht sich mir, and I presume that I also come from a Chassidish home. She's only the wife of a Rebbe, the daughter of a Rebbe, granddaughter of a great-granddaughter, all the way to the Alter Rebbe. She says, I think I also come from a Chassidish home. And they educated us that when you're given something, you take it. Like good in chocolate, especially a good chocolate. So he took it and enjoyed it, shared it with his friends. Shmaka story. It right away brings to mind the story with her grandfather, indeed, the Tzemach Tzedek, who said once that the Alter Rebbe had offered him as a gift a certain amount of yidiyah, a certain amount of knowledge in Torah. And he rejected it because he wants to struggle, he wants to exert himself. He doesn't want it as a gift, he wants to make an effort to get it on his own. Anyway, and then later he says he regretted it. Because since Torah is aruchem at its midah v'rechavim miniyam, Torah is ein sof, is infinite. So as much as he would have gotten as a gift, he could have always used his effort to go further. It comes to mind that Rebbetzin is saying, when you're given something, you take it. It's a gift. So we were given tremendous keiches, tremendous resources. Eitzes, as we learned in the Maimer Bas Legani, Eitzes, treasures that were concealed and never revealed, are given to us, the front line, the soldiers, the plain foot soldiers that lead the way in fighting the battle of making this world adira betachtenim, a home for God, ashpeshachanti b'seicham. And when you're given something, you take it, which means you appreciate it. You don't take it for granted. You take it and you use it to the fullest, and then put more effort to go beyond. And that's what we have to take away from Chof Beis Shevat, the tremendous power that the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin gave us, the power of Chof Beis Shevat, Chof Beis Eisius, B'cho Yivorech Yisrael. I wrote another story, which also a Gishmaka story, somebody who went to visit the Rebbetzin once. And the Rebbetzin gave him a cup of tea, and they were standing and speaking. And I guess he wasn't the wisest individual, so he started telling the Rebbetzin about in his city, which was out of the country, there were all kinds of fights and machlekes and disagreements and conflicts. And he was just sharing it, and the Rebbetzin at some point clearly was very agitated by it. She was disturbed. And she made us, in her edel, a very refined way, she made like this to him, like, be quiet a minute, and told him to put down his cup of tea. He put it down. And she said to him these words. She says, "The Zayd hat gesagt, as in Lubavitch is alles gut." My grandfather said, the Rebbe Rashab, that in Lubavitch everything is good. So what did this guy say? Rebbetzin, with all due respect, it's not good. And he went on with another barrage of problems. It got to the newspapers, and there's all kinds of arguments, and people are talking. Anyway, then the Rebbetzin cut him off again and said to him, "If it's nicht gut, it's nicht Lubavitch. If it's not good, it's not Lubavitch." Think of the words. That's Lubavitch. Lubavitch is good. And if it's not good, it's not Lubavitch. It reminds me, I remember my father, Olav Shalom, was a journalist, the publisher and editor, Allgemeine Journal. So he once wrote an article about to extinguish the fires of machlekes in Lubavitch. There were conflicts that were going on. So I called my father and I said, with respect to you as my father, do you mind if I write an article, but like a rebuttal to your article? No, my father loved it. So I actually wrote an article in Yiddish saying, with all respect to my father, machlekes is not in Lubavitch. And I told another story, a famous story of a chassid who used to walk from where was it? One of the cities not far from Lubavitch. He would always walk to Lubavitch for Yom Tov to go to the Rebbe, his Rebbe. As he got older, his family said, "But you have to walk before Yom Tov. We'll take you in a wagon with a horse, and you could stay Yom Tov there." No, he insisted on walking. After a while, they said, "Why? Why do you insist on walking?" So he says, "Look, I'm going to come up after Me'ev Esrim Shana, 120 years, to heaven, and they're going to ask me, what chusim do I have? What merits do I have? And the merit that I know is the one I walked to my own Rebbe. I walked with my own feet to the Rebbe, and I don't want a horse coming along and saying, I also want partial reward because you rode with me. In my Lubavitch will ich kein Pferd nicht haben. In my Lubavitch, I don't want to have a horse." So I had not heard the story, the Rebbetzin story yet. I heard that years later. But that's the story. There's Lubavitch and there's the Pferd. There's what's good, and that's Lubavitch. And what's not good is not in Lubavitch. The fact that somebody may call themselves Lubavitch, that doesn't mean it's Lubavitch. It's a very beautiful way of putting it. And of course, we cannot forget that Rebbetzins words, that was such a linchpin, cornerstone to the Hey Tevis case. Ad the Rebbe allein belongs to Chassidim. When she was asked, do the Sforim belong to the Rebbe or to the Chassidim? The Rebbe allein belongs to Chassidim. There's volumes and volumes that we can learn from these statements, from these approaches. It's the approach of what a Rebbe is, what Chassidus is, what Lubavitch is, coming from the Rebbetzins words herself. Those are some of the lessons that we can learn about what we should be living up to. A famous expression the Rebbe would often quote, Imreiku mikemhu. If something is missing, you don't understand something, don't blame the one that said it to you. Look at yourself. If it's empty, it means mikem, something's missing by you. If it's not good, it's you. It's not about Lubavitch, it's not about the Rebbe. And it's critical to keep that in mind all the time. Teira semes, Hashem emes. These things are pure. We never want to sully, in any way pollute these high standards. We're not there yet. That we're all human beings. We're all flawed. We all have our shortcomings. Critical lesson to understand in life, to be able to know, as the Alter Rebbe said, how small you are and how great you can become. You have to know where you are. You have to know how great you can become. The Rebbetzin, of course, epitomized that in her own private, quiet, and discreet way. Okay. With that, let us speak about this week's Parsha, Parsha's Mishpatim. So let's go over that. The Mishpatim Tov Mem Ches, the year of the histalkus, that Shabbos was the middle of Shiva. So initially the Rebbe was not going to farbreng, even though he was farbreng every week. Initially he was going to stay home. But then Friday afternoon, word came that Rebbe was going to 770, he's going to farbreng. One of the things that Rebbe spoke about, and I also had the schus to prepare that sikh, it's printed in Sefer HaSichos Tosh Mem Ches, Eila Mishpatim, the Zohar, and Eila Mishpatim, these are the rules, these are the laws of what? Of Gilgulim, of reincarnations. It talks about neshamas. These are the rules of how neshamas travel. And of course the connection to Chof Beis Shevat is obvious, and the Rebbe spoke about that connection very directly. So that's an overall connection to Chof Beis Shevat, Mishpatim. The Mishpatim are the rules, yes, the laws of the Torah, but it's also the laws of the journey of souls. And the truth is, it's not the opposite of the Pshat. The Pshat that talks about the Kisikne Evedivri, whether it's the Evedivri, the servants, or the Eved Kanani, or the Omer Ivriya. You look at Chassidus, different places in Derech Chaim, there's a famous Maimer from the Alter Rebbe, which the Tzemach Tzedek calls Drush Nichbad Ma'oid. The Rebbe makes reference to it. A very distinguished Maimer. It's a rare expression where he explains that this is all the journey of the souls. In Torah as well, in Mishpatim. The journey of the souls in the 6 years is the 6 millennia of the soul's work in this world, and then the 7th millennia, Shabbos, Shana Hashvius, when you go free, is the freedom of the Geula, as discussed in the Maimorim. So indeed, that is the story of the souls. So Chof Beis Shevat, the story of a soul and a Shama of the Rebbetzin. And the Rebbe spoke about that and many other different topics. Again, something worthwhile learning and reading. Mishpatim Tov Mem Ches. So, for the practical lessons that we learn from Mishpatim, one of the classics, of course, is Ve'ela Mishpatim. Ve'ela means, when you say Ve'ela, it means Mesif ala Rishenim, that it follows Matan Torah, that just as the laws that were given at Sinai were from the laws in the previous Parsha were given at Sinai, also these laws in Mishpatim are given at Sinai. What's the Chiddush? So this brings us to the point. The Chiddush is, because we're talking now the laws that are rational laws, logical laws. You could say the laws given at Sinai that are super rational, for sure, you need God to give it. But the logical laws, who says? So we say no, the logical laws are also part of what's given at Sinai. Which answers another question, why is it called Mishpatim? We know there's Chukim, Edus, Mishpatim, 3 names for mitzvahs. Mishpatim are the rational mitzvahs, the ones that we could have figured out on our own as well. Things like loving another, being kind, charitable. Edus are commemorative mitzvahs, like Shabbos, Yom Tov. Tzias Mitzrayim, Zeichli Tzias Mitzrayim. We commemorate an event that happened. It makes sense, but it's more commemorative rather than just a purely logical, ethical law. And Chukim are the super rational laws. Paraduma, shatness. Paraduma is, of course, the classic. Zeis Chukas HaTeira. Something no human being would ever have come up with. It has to be coming from God. Chassidus explains, especially the Frierdiker Rebbe, that the truth is all mitzvahs have an element of chukim. They're all really, even if it manifests in logic, but it originates, because who created logic? Like you can ask, is logic logical? Who created logic? So logic also is based on something that's super rational. And the other way around, even chukim can be explained, as the Rambam says, we always look for reasons, ethical reasons, morals, lessons we can learn even from chukim. Chassidus does indeed explain even paraduma. Doesn't explain the mitzvah that this is the reason for it, because the reason is higher than reason. Why? Because we need a combination of both. We need to integrate, and that's the chiddush of Ela Mishpatim. That this is also to tell us that the super rational, the connection to God beyond logic, is also what permeates logic, because we want to make a dira b'tachtenim, that the divine should permeate our minds, not just our faith. So one lesson in Mishpatim is that lesson, the lesson of the connection between our rational minds and the rational structure of existence and all its rules and parameters connected to that which is beyond. And that's indeed what happened by Matan Torah. Aseres HaDibros. So Chassidus asks the question, they're dvarim pshutim. Do not steal, do not murder. They're all logical mitzvahs. And why then do you need Anochi Hashem Elokecha? Because you want to say that the most logical, rational mitzvahs, if you don't have the God element, the foundation, that makes it unwavering, everybody can use their mind and can make exceptions. Like we see, the Rebbe brings examples of Yamach Shemai, the Nazis. They decided to play God, and when they start saying there's no Anochi Hashem Elokecha, then I can decide who you can kill, who you cannot kill. But when it's based on a foundation that's beyond us, God gave us these rules, not just based on our logic, that even our logic is based on something higher than ourselves. That's what guarantees that it would be kept absolutely. And it's a lesson in life in general that the things that we don't understand, we could say, okay, I suspend myself and surrender to God. But the things we think we have figured out, how I run my business and other things we think we're experts. Says the Torah, no, not keichiv eitzim yodi asali asachayil hazeh. Don't think you're self-made. In the Perek Yud Gimel of Yud Shevat that we learned this year, in Tavshin's Pei Gimel, the 13th chapter, he talks about that. That the idea of pari in Bali Esek would be someone that liyu eriv ani asesini. I'm self-made. You have to know, Birchas Hashem hitashir. God's blessing is what makes you wealthy. God wants you to do and make a container, but it's a Baruch Hashem Elokecha. The Eibishter is Asli Asachayil Hazeh. He gave you the power and the strength. And that's a bigger challenge. It's easy to suspend ourselves when we don't know. It's when you do know to realize that even what you know is also aligned with a higher purpose. The story they tell about Rab Aaron Belinitzer, the Rebbe would refers to it in some letters in the early years, in Tavshin Yud Aleph. So Aaron Belinitzer was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. And Tzemach Tzedek would go to Petersburg, to deal with different government things, to make life a little easier for the Jews, decrees and laws that they would pass. Once he couldn't go to Petersburg, to Petersburg, so he called in Rabban. He said, I want you to go on my behalf, you're my shliach. And he told him, gave him some instructions, and Rabban said, what should I do if I have a question, if I have a doubt? Remember, then there were no emails and no faxes and no phones. So what should I do? He's asking. So Tzemach Tzedek said, Boy al das atzmei. You'll build on your own discretion. Think it through and decide. The Rebbe Marash, who was there, the son of the Tzemach Tzedek, didn't say anything, but he thought to himself, Rabban is a very big chassid, everything nice and good, but eigene das atzmei. He has his eigene das, he has his own das. So he had a question about him. Anyway, the day came, he went off. Tzemach Tzedek was sitting at a meal with his family. Rebbe Marash was there as well. And he could see that Tzemach Tzedek suddenly is in another place. And he says, Rabban matet sich in Peterburg. Rabban was indeed having a problem, a dilemma. And he didn't know what to do. Tzemach Tzedek sensed it. Everyone waited a few minutes. Tzemach Tzedek then smiled and said, good. At Mechaving event. Good. Rabban he did well. He was Mechaving, he was aligned the way I would have done it. And the Rebbe Marash suddenly realized, on the contrary, had the Tzemach Tzedek just sent a puppet, a robot, who didn't have a das atzmei, didn't have independent volition, his own will, his own understanding, okay, so he's very bottle and he's committed. But here Rabban had his das atzmei. And still, he aligned to what the Rebbe would have done. That's the big chiddush. That even if it's not Mishpatim, okay, so of course you have no other choice. It's what God says, you do what God wants. But when it's now being mislabish, it's manifest in your mind. Is your mind also going to be aligned? That's the key. And the Rebbe would always emphasize this. For shluchim, a shliach has to be a bar das b'fnei atzmei. A shliach al pi halacha cannot be a son, cannot be a servant, cannot be somebody who doesn't have independent, a cotton, a child, who doesn't have independent mind. He has to have an independent mind and chooses at his own volition to be a shliach of the Mishaleach. Now you could say, one second, isn't it easier to send someone who doesn't have their own mind? But that's not a shliach. So a shliach is like a contradiction in a way. He's of his own mind, but he chooses to align himself with the Mishaleach. And then shluchah shalom kamese. Then he becomes power of attorney, becomes a direct line, channel of Mishaleach. And so go shliach, shliach, all to the first Mishaleach. Of course, he has to not be moel b'shlichusei. Can't mutineer, he can't go against what his mandate is. But that's the key. So that's the lesson, to be independent, to have your individuality, but make sure it's aligned with Sinai, from Sinai. Since we're talking about Yud Shevat, Chof Beis Shevat, of course, follows Yud Shevat, all in the month of Shvat. So let's do a few questions and a few follow-ups from previous programs, especially 2 weeks ago. I didn't have a chance to do it last week. So, about Yud Shevat, someone wrote, did the Frierdiker Rebbe clearly say or subtly hint that the Rebbe should succeed him? So, we don't know of any instructions, whether it was verbal or in writing. Rumors always flew around, but there was nothing specific. And the best proof is that we see, indeed, even though there are many Chassidim that immediately knew who the Rebbe is, but it wasn't something that was someone could point to a document. So that's the short answer. People, Chassidim, have pointed out that when it came to the Rebbeim, every second generation was like that. The Alter Rebbe was very clear that it would be the Mittler Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe either said it or wrote it even. We came to the Tzemach Tzedek, it was not clear. That's why there was a whole story with a dream, Isha Kisazriya, the Yolda Zachar, and that was a proof that they brought that the Tzemach Tzedek should be, was a grandson of the Alter Rebbe through his daughter, Rebbetzin Vayda. Rebbe Marash is a clear tzavor from the Tzemach Tzedek that Rebbe Marash should be Rebbe. The Rebbe Marash to the next Rebbe Rashab, there's nothing clear. As a matter of fact, for a number of years, the Rebbe Rashab refused to be officially considered the Rebbe. His older brother, the Razal. From the Rebbe Rashab to the Frierdiker Rebbe, again, obvious, a ben Yachid. It was also very clear that he groomed him for this. Told him to say Maimer, very clear. And the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe to the Rebbe, again, not specific. That was always pointed out by Chassidim. Why is that way? I cannot say. We can speculate that sometimes you need to have clear instructions, sometimes it has to be mitzvah ve'esa, sometimes it ain't a mitzvah ve'esa. Each one has its quality. Sometimes to be told what to do, sometimes we have to come to it from ourselves, like we said before, das atzmei, that people should recognize it. Like the Mile of Purim over Matan Torah. Matan Torah was, the Gemara says in Shabbos, that the Eden could have a taina. Why? Because they could say, Midor Rabel Araisa, that you compelled us to receive the Torah. That's why comes Purim, V'kimu Yehudim, Kimu Mashe Kiblu Lasis. That they now, in Purim, they did it completely on their own will. So there's no more the taina that God, so to speak, compelled them. So there's the mile in each one, and we know that Rebbe's Nesius was always that way. He's made it clear. I'm not going to force you to do anything, but it was very clear what the Rebbe wanted, but we had to initiate on our own. In many ways, that's more pnimistic and more internalized and more integrated. Okay. Follow-up. Let's do some follow-up. So we spoke about the names of the Rebbeim. So we know that the Rebbe was against mixing a Rebbe with a regular name of a person, when I say of a commoner, if you wish. But how about mixing the Rebbeim themselves? Meaning the two names, where let's say one person has the name, Yitzchak is the father's name, so you can't give the name Yosef Yitzchak. You can't give Yosef Shneir, or something like that. So the Rebbe actually wrote to somebody, Tov Shel Lamed Hey, so there's a chassid who said that he wanted to call his first son, his Bchar, by the name Frierdiker Rebbe, but his name Yitzchak he couldn't because that was his name, the father's name. So he was thinking Yosef Menachem Mendel. And he asked the Rabbi Chadakov to check with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, Tzneuforden zwei Rebbeim is nicht kein Nicht for mir und nicht for dir. Meaning mixing. Tzneuforden means more than that. Like, it's a neifon, like just mixing, combining two Rebbeim is not an inyan. Not for me and not for you. On the other hand, I did hear that Rabbi Groner said that the Rebbe had, in other situations, said it's fine. So this, it could be different case scenarios, even though this sounds like something which is really universal, because the Rebbe gives a reason. But this, I just wanted to read that. Someone else asked a question, Rabbi Jacobson, Chassidus Applied, episode 435. You mentioned that the Rebbe said not to mix the name of a Rebbe with a non-Rebbe. However, I always wondered, because Nayem Yem of Chof Cheshvan, the Rebbe says that the Rebbe Rashab was named after the Mittler Rebbe and have the name of the Tzemach Tzaddik's father, Shalom Shachna, Shalom Dovber. Please explain that apparent contradiction. Thank you. So first of all, let's make it clear. The Rebbe Rashab was named by a Rebbe. So when a Rebbe names somebody, he knows what he's doing and he knows what to do, what he can't do. The Hira is to us not to mix the two. That we have clearly. So that's a complete exception. And it could very well be, we're talking about the Tzemach Tzaddik's father, there's a special, also special status. That would be my most obvious answer to that. Okay. Another thing we spoke about, and I had misspoken, I want to correct myself, was I said that the Tzemach Tzaddik's histalkus, I'm sorry, at the Frierdiker Rebbe's histalkus, there was a kohen, a Levi, in Yisrael. And I misspoke of who was what. The kohen was Shalom ber Eichhorn, the Levi was Shmuel Levittin, and Rabbi Yechon Gordon was the Yisrael. So I stand corrected. Okay. Since we're doing already follow-up, let's do another follow-up of Parshas B'Shalach. Simply, I mentioned a number of times, a lot of questions come in, and I'm unable to cover them all, so I hopefully tried to catch up. So let's do a few about B'Shalach. And then there's some others that we will continue to cover. Let's hopefully see how much we can cover today. Okay. In Parsha B'Shalach, we read about Kriyas Yamsuf, the parting of the sea. So there's a famous expression in the Gemara that says, Kosher zivugan ki Kriyas Yamsuf. It's difficult to make a zivug like Kriyas Yamsuf, like the parting of the sea. So the question is, how can we say that creating shidduchim, like the parting of the sea, is difficult for God? How is anything difficult for God? And here's how the person writes this. In some place, in reference to shidduchim, it's told that making shidduchim is more difficult for Hashem than splitting the Red Sea, not more. Ki Kriyas Yamsuf. It begs the question, if Hashem is infinitely powerful, then why would anything be difficult for him? Whether it's splitting a sea or making a shidduch. Hashem can do anything he wants. What does Chazal mean when they say something is difficult for him? Okay. So the Untitled Rebbe talks about this in Shara HaAmunah, and other places it's cited. Obviously, for Eibishter, the Kol Yochel, he can do whatever he wants. Nothing is difficult. But remember that the same Eibishter chose to create the world with certain laws. It was not you and I that created it by those laws, the laws of nature. And he chose to bind himself by these laws, especially after the Mabul, Lo Yishbesu. He will no longer in any way pause or suspend the laws of nature, of the seasons, of the mazolas, which happen at the Mabul. And even there, he suspended it, but didn't completely destroy the sun and the moon and so on. So the Eibishter bound himself to these laws. Indeed, that's why in halacha you're supposed to do a mitzvah b'derech hateva. If, what difference does it make? Why did the Alter Rebbe have to stop the boat to make Kiddush HaLevana miraculously, and then he let the boat continue, and he wanted the captain to stop it? Because mitzvahs have to be done b'derech hateva, because derech hateva is sacred in a certain way, because those are the laws that God created. And he said, I want you to do it a certain way, in that way. Why? You could ask the same question, why he wants in Sava Kodesh Baruch Hu, he desired to have a dira b'tachtenim. But the tachtenim he chose follow certain laws. And Hashem is self-bound. Look at even Kriyas Yamsuf. Even though it's one of the greatest miracles. Hashem could have had to do all these methods. Make a wind come, and the wind cause the water to rise and stand like a wall. Why did he need that? He could have made the Jews just walk through the water and it won't affect you. Or he could have just made the water go without a wind. He doesn't need any manifestation. There are many ways to do it. He could have had them fly over the water. Because as much as possible, the Eibishter wants it to be without suspending all the laws. Some laws he suspends. In most cases, not. That's why it says it doesn't do a miracle for no reason. Why not? Just do a miracle. Because the laws of nature are part of the divine plan. And that's why kosher, Kav Yochel, it's difficult for him to go ahead and intervene and suspend the very laws that he himself created. He says it's difficult for me. And yet, at times he does it. And that's what we learn about shidduchim. That shidduchim, you're dealing with a male and female, different families. If you think about it, so many different opposites, so many reasons it shouldn't work. And yet, the Eibishter gives a special koyach. Just like he gave the koyach by Kriyas Yamsuf, land and water, so different from each other, like male and female. And yet he gave the koyach of hofach yom liyabosha to be able to join the two. Someone once went by dollars, and I said to the Rebbe that he wants a bracha for the kosher ki Kriyas Yamsuf, for a shidduch. So the Rebbe said, ki Kriyas Yamsuf, chof adimyan. It's only like Kriyas Yamsuf, meaning it's not as difficult. Okay. So that covers that. Another question came in on B'Shalach. It says when the Jewish people crossed the Red Sea safely, they took out their musical instruments and started singing praises to God. It makes us think, just a short time earlier they were instructed to leave Egypt, and they left so quickly they didn't have time for their dough to rise. In the short time they had to pack their bags, one would think they would only have time to pack the most urgent items for survival, food and clothing and medicines, etc. But it seems many of us pack musical instruments. My question for Rabbi Jacobson is, why is it so important to bring musical instruments? What part of the experience of music is important to the imminent survival of a large group of people running away from captivity and bondage? Okay. So Rashi in Beshalach actually says the following, where it talks about the musical instruments. Tezvav Chof, 1520. So it says, "V'tikach Miriam hanavia ches adnas hatef b'yoda v'teitzana kol hanoshim acharev but besufim ub'mcheles besufim ub'mcheles." So Rashi says on besufim ub'mcheles, which means Miriam took a tambourine or a different names for it. And she went out, and all the women followed her with their tambourines and drums. So it says, that the righteous women of the generation were so sure and confident, trusting in God, that He would do for them miracles, that they took their tufim mitzrayim, they took their tambourines from Egypt. That's what the Mechilta says. You could still say, why dafka musical instruments? Because music, you can imagine, you see song and music, look what role it plays whenever we're in any given situation, especially in a difficult one. There's no question that the men, women, and children sang a lot of songs in Mitzrayim when they suffered, and it lifted their spirits. Nigan Tfilah is from the words of Tfilah, Shira, song. So they were confident that Hashem would do miracles. They were confident that they would need to play song and play music. And it was a vital component. It wasn't just an addendum. Because why did they sing Shira after Kriyas Yamsuf? They just broke out in song, because song represents the innermost depths of the soul, speaking to God, singing to God. As a matter of fact, song reveals your innermost feelings. And what was Kriyas Yamsuf? The revelation of the sea and land, that you could see within the sea. The sea is also a hidden world. Song is the idea of revealing that which is hidden, the hidden worlds. Alma Diskasi is the world of the sea, and Kriyas Yamsuf was revealing that. Song is a form of gaguim, of yearning, of longing, and especially V'tosha Miriam, especially Miriam's song, as the Rebbe brings from the Likutei Diburim, a famous story, the Baal Shem Tov. Why V'tosha Dveira? Why is the Haftarah Dveira? Why not the story of the Shira of, let's say, David? Why a woman? I mean, it says Oz Yosef Meisha B'nei Yisrael, and then came Miriam. So why is the Haftarah the woman's song, Dveira, not the song of the men? Because in some way, and that's why it says Koil Be'isha Erva, the woman's song, because she comes from a deeper soulful place, her song reflects more of an intimate nature. And that's why she captures Hakol HaYamina Ofer, as the Alter Rebbe explains in that story in the Likutei Diburim. It is the woman that has the power to transform, not like no other. So her song is a deeper reach, and that's why there's more care to be taken when a woman sings, because she can reach deeper into the soul than a man. And that's why the Haftarah is Dveira. So they were convinced that they would need to sing, and they would need to play music. And that's why they took their musical instruments with them. It's a tremendous lesson in life that even when you're suffering, don't forget to sing. Don't forget your instrument. Everyone has their instrument. Because these instruments, not only the time of difficulty, but when the time when you'll need to praise, you want to be ready. You're ready to sing. And you're always thinking that. I cannot wait to sing my song of praise to God for my miracles, for my blessings, for my gifts. It's a beautiful lesson. Does it say somewhere that composing music is a form of prophecy? If that's the case, are musicians prophets? If someone needs a bracha and isn't in a place where they can ask a rabbi, can they ask a piano player or a guitar player for a blessing? Interesting question. I don't know if composing music is a form of prophecy, even though I am sure that some musicians in history, the Levim, or some prophets who composed the song, Shira was a form of prophecy. Was Oz Yosher Meisha a form of prophecy, of Nevuah? Again, this would need more research. I didn't do the research, but if somebody has more information on this, please share it with me and I'll share it with the audience. But there is an element, I wouldn't necessarily call it, even if it doesn't say it's prophecy, but it's definitely an element of revelation. Revelation of a deeper place. The people who, certain Nugunim you hear, composed back then, and even today, Chassidus Nugunim over the years, you could feel that the person who composed the song had access to a higher place, a deeper place. Especially when a Rebbe composes a song. It reflects on a deeper level. David HaMelech was, of course, Ne'im Zmiris Yisrael, song, a singer, composer, and he actually asked Hashem, Yirotzen Imre Fi. He said, may it be your will that the words I sang to you, I cried out to you, my words of praise should become the words that Jews use forever. So it ends up becoming like a prophecy. So there's definitely overlap. And whether you can go over to any piano player, I think every musician, especially if they use their music for good things and holy things, is a form of revelation. It's definitely a gift of God. The ability to express a certain sentiment, a certain feeling, experience, in a way that not everybody is capable of doing, and giving us the language, so to speak, and giving us the tools, the ability to express ourselves in times, to transport us to another time and place. Kol Bali Asher Nechnosim B'Shir V'Yetzim B'Shir, as the Alter Rebbe interprets, song is soul transportation. It allows you, your spirit, to soar, to reach places you can never reach on your own. That's the power of a nigun. Okay. Well, moving from I want to add one more thing. The Gemara talks about the batche. When people buy dollars went over different singers, the Rebbe would say, since you misamei echidin, you go straight to Elam Haba, as the Gemara says about the trei batche. The two batche are more entertainers, the batchonim, and performers. But the same idea, when you make other people happy, and musicians are included, there's also a special koyach, special blessing that you get. Okay. So, let us now talk about, someone asked about dreams. Should we interpret dreams? So I get a lot of different letters about this. I can't always read them because some of them are very personal, some of them are very strange as well. Now, as I always say, nothing's taboo, but I don't know if it's always for the public. Sometimes it's more of a private question. But I'll read one. Rabbi Jacobson, can you please answer my question if you have the time? I know nothing of Jewish tradition or cultural do's and don'ts, so I'd figure I'd ask direct. Remember, some of these questions are coming from people who are listening to different programs of ours. I watched your YouTube video titled, What is Kabbalah? And it blew my mind. So much of it was vital to my spiritual journey. I have prophetic dreams and visions from God often. In a recent dream, a bushman came to my home and we said we need to talk, meaning him and I. He came into my house with many people and there was a big party, dancing, singing, and clapping. It's important to know that I'm Australian. A bushman to me wears a dark hat, has a bushy beard, and wears a long dark coat. As usual, when the time is right, the details of the dream are revealed by God. And later an image crossed my path and it occurred to me that my bushman visitor with his party in tow was in fact a Jewish man. So I am of course surprised and keen to learn whatever it is that I need to learn and watch more of your videos. But as mentioned above, I need to know if this is okay. And of course I'd like to say thank you and I love the video. So in general, we stay away from interpreting dreams unless we have no choice, which means it's either really disturbing us, that's why you have the concept of a tainus cholam, or it's repeated dreams. Then it's good to go to someone, a mentor, a spiritual mentor, a responsible person. Because there are many people who are, let's call them predators, con artists, snake oil salesmen, that are going to just take advantage, exploit, and so on. We're not talking about that level. Feeding off vulnerable people, have a dream and try to interpret it and then charge for it, etc. So you have to be very careful. Even though in the Torah we speak about dreams. Joseph interpreted dreams. But there's also V'ovev Shamar Sadover, which the Gemara in Bracha says that Yaakov was quiet because a dream follows its interpretation, and that's why we don't have to always interpret things. So I would stay away from interpretations, especially not knowing in a dream you have Dvarim B'Teilim, there's no dream without nonsense. On the other hand, the dream could have certain glimpses. And above all, everything about this has to be responsible. Is it leading to you being a more responsible person, or is it an escape or an excuse even? The Rebbe once told somebody, before we figure out our dreams, let's figure out what we're doing when we're awake. So I would avoid interpretations. I would look more to what is your life like? Are things going well? If not, what can be done to make them better before we go to dreams? Someone who's experienced and has the maturity and the balance can determine maybe it's time maybe to look at a dream if indeed one jumps out at us. But beyond that, that's my response. I have spoken about this before. Okay, talking about this, let's talk now about therapy. So someone asked the following. This is how they put it. I hate therapy. That's how the email began. I was forced into it as a child for being too quiet by the high school administration. All it did was worsen my relationship with my parents. No one cared what I had to say, and everyone, including the high school administration, wanted me to shut up anyway. I just got mixed messages. The pain continued until adulthood and marriage, and all I can get is try therapy again. Pay hundreds of dollars to undo what was wrongly done to me. I felt, is that what I should do? Pay hundreds of dollars to undo what was wrongly done to me? I felt like a great child in high school, wanting to please my parents with good grades. All was ruined by the jerks in high school. I was also nearly fired by being too much, bringing too much negativity. I thought I was supposed to talk like that. That is what I hear my coworkers do all the time. But when I do it, it is wrong for me. I wanted to hurt myself and commit suicide if the firing was finalized, but thankfully I was saved. Even talking positively got me in trouble. So I doubled down on being quiet and feel tons of resentment. I even tracked out the principal who did this to me, apologized and asked for mechila, and then said she has no time for me and basically blocked me. Had enough time to ruin my life, but not enough time to try to fix it. I'm trying to pay all my bills, and I do not want to take on therapy as another expense to undo what was wrongly done to me. So I have to suffer until it is time for me to leave this world. I really hate when rabbis tell me to do therapy. And also men mock women for talking. But when a woman does not talk much, suddenly it is a problem. Okay, well, I don't know all the circumstances. And frankly, being that this is this is my life Chassidus Applied, I want to say that the approach the Rebbe already gave us, you have to find yourself a mentor, a mashpia, a spiritual mentor, a rav, a selech harav, or knei lecha chaver, a good friend. One person that you can trust and speak to about your situation. First of all, I need to hear all the details. Because the concept of having somebody to speak to him, somebody has anxiety in their heart, they should speak about it. That's one of the interpretations in the Gemara. To speak about it. And the Rebbe Marash explained, by speaking, you release it. You can free yourself from it. So it's important to have someone to speak to. It's very hard for me to answer because I don't know all the circumstances. So, you hate therapy? A lot of therapy is not necessarily good. Agreed. But having a trusted friend, a trusted mentor, someone you can open up to is critical. Because they can see things more objectively. Someone cares about you. They may see your blind spots and help guide you along in a sensitive, empathetic, and kind fashion. That's what I say to you and to anyone who has a similar type of question. Okay. So now I want to deal with the time left, let's deal with 2 questions regarding tensions. What can I do about tensions between myself and my spouse around religion? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I hope that my message finds you well. I appreciate your show very much. You have addressed issues I struggle with on numerous occasions and have helped me to form healthier and more balanced perceptions. I'm writing today because a little while ago I started becoming religious. I am married with children and my husband has always been very tolerant and accepting. He has even grown so much, doing more with respect to Judaism. In many ways, I'm so grateful for his acceptance. He has let go of so much to allow me to be frum. However, there's plenty of tension regarding my observance level, and sometimes tznius and kashrus upsets him and gets him on his nerves. I also don't want to push him away from Yiddishkeit. He feels that my tznius ways of dress is not appealing to him, and he prefers I dress more like I used to. He also doesn't like any of my head coverings. I've tried many styles, and I'm not sure what else to do. Everything I read in my learning points to how special to how special increasing tznius is, and how it is good to strive to grow and be more tznius. I consult Rabbanim frequently with regard to individual issues that arise, but our shalom bayis is an ongoing challenge that I'm not sure how to approach. I would like to have a more thought-out strategy for dealing with this. Thank you for taking the time to read, and thanks for any guidance you can offer. Well, shalom bayis, as you accurately describe, is the single biggest foundation to everything. The Rambam says at the end of Hilchas Chanukah, Godel HaShalom. Greatest thing is peace, harmony at home. The whole Torah was given just to bring peace in this world. And he brings the law that if you have money, and it's Chanukah Shabbos, and you have only to light Shabbos candle or Chanukah candle, which one do you light? So you may think Chanukah candle, because Shabbos is every week. No. Chanukah candles come to celebrate and publicize God's miracle, Pirsum Nisa. Shabbos candles come to preserve Shalom Bayis, and Shalom Bayis is always more powerful. And then he brings something wild. He brings, and that's why the Eibishter said, Yimcha Shmi, erase my name. When a woman is accused of infidelity in the laws of Seita, so one of the ways they prove her innocence is by putting God's name on her tongue, under her tongue, and it dissolves. And then you know. Why would God do such a thing? Remember, erasing God's name is one of the cardinal sin. Because erase my name to preserve harmony and peace between husband and wife. God wants to show, don't use me between husband and wife. So though obviously the standards of Torah and mitzvahs are the way God wants us to live, but he also wants us to have shalom bayis. So what do you do when there's a conflict between the two? Fundamentally, there shouldn't be one. But sometimes human beings are human beings based on their comfort zone, based on their history, based on their baggage, based on their past, as you're describing. So my advice to you is, first of all, be as loving as you can to your husband. And the more frum you want to be even more loving. He needs to see that your relationship with God and with Yiddishkeit and your relationship with love is the same thing. You can't see it as competition. Oh, you're connecting to God, but you're creating distance between us. No. The more closer you are to God, the closer you should be to your husband. He needs to see that. Because without that, you will create a rift. As far as specifics, I would advise going to a third party. Well, before a third party, I would create some communication. Can't just be a conflict. Hear what your husband has to say. Listen to him closely. Being that you seem to be the more committed one in certain areas, and I have to say for the record, it very well be that he may be committed in other areas that you need to embrace. Remember, tznius and kashrus, as important as they are, there are other aspects to a relationship. Being that I don't know everything that's going on, it's hard for me to say. So see where your husband brings a certain dimension that maybe he can teach you. And listen to him closely. See what his concern is and try to address it. Don't make it's between you and God, between you and tznius, between you and kashrus. And then finally, find the third party that he trusts, where he can speak very openly and bluntly, and you can speak, to see if there's anything that can be done that can bring you guys closer. But always remember, relationship with God should make you closer to your husband, not more distant. And if it's making more distance, even if you were to say it's his fault because he doesn't accept it yet, no, but you're the one that has to be wiser. Something has to be done to make sure that your relationship with God, with mitzvahs, with tznius, with kashrus, whatever it may be, only brings you closer to your husband and your husband closer to you and to your children. And there's no question that if you make that effort, get the ego out of the way. And ego can also be sometimes religious ego. You'll achieve the intended results. But being, again, I'm only reading this, I don't know all the details, something that you need to discuss with someone more detailed so to be able to really answer and deal with all the nuances. In that vein, someone asks, how to empower my husband and not become a nag? Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I hope that this message finds you well. I'm writing to ask your opinion about how to get away from nagging and instead empowering my husband. I have read on many occasions about how it is the special role of the Jewish woman to set the tone for her family. I would love for our family to be doing exactly what Hashem desires of us. Sometimes, though, I get into trouble with the delivery. though I know that I have good intentions. Can you help me find the right balance? The most clear example of this is tzedakah. I often send my husband tzedakah opportunities. I often try to encourage him to increase our family's tzedakah, charity pledges, our tzedakah of charity pledges, and the frequency of them. My husband often gets upset and frustrated when I do this. Is there anything I can do to empower my husband to do more tzedakah without it coming off as nagging? Maybe there's a better way to communicate that what I've been doing currently. Just asking him and sending him links to opportunities. Thank you so much for your response. Okay. So my response is as follows, very similar to what I said in the previous question about the previous question. Before you start imposing your approach on your husband, why don't you speak to him and say, I love tzedakah. I don't want to be the one that pushes you. Because then it comes across, okay, he's doing you a favor, he may be tolerating you, or he sees you as a nag. Why don't you ask him, what are ways we could increase, and how could I be supportive? I don't want to be the person that's initiating, I don't want to be the person that's nagging. Let him speak. It sounds to me that you have your way, and maybe with all the good intentions, as you say. And that's that. So it's not just how to say it, it's first also laying the groundwork, having an environment for it. Let's say you decide that you love to make a certain food every night or every few nights, and your husband eats it. Why don't you ask him, is this something you'd like? And he may say, let's try something else, not to insult you, because maybe he has different tastes. But open up the conversation. What I feel missing maybe is opening up the conversation and letting him speak. Just to, and sometimes there are things he wants to do that you're not doing. So instead of imposing, now tzedakah is a beautiful mitzvah and a great mitzvah, but there may be other things. Make it a partnership instead of, how am I going to figure out how to maneuver to get him to give more tzedakah, more frequent, and so on. Also, help empower his strengths. What is he good at? What does he like to do? There may be things that he likes to do that you're not emphasizing. The more empowering, the more he will more likely respond to something that you ask for. Which brings me to the final point. Love always gets what you want. Be loving, not demanding, not imposing, not insisting, not saying you know better. You may not be intending to do all of that, but it can come across that way. And that's where you need to let him speak. Open it up. You want to create a more godly home. Ask him, what can we do to make our home more godly? And turn to him for leadership. Not just, it's not a rhetorical question, so you should answer it. Let him answer it. Because at the end of the day, tzedakah is one piece of many different factors and ingredients that makes a home a more divine home. That's what you want to do. It could be through learning. There's Torah, Vedic, Mils, Chassan. There are 3 pillars. You have children. You have other things in your family. There's Shabbos. There's so many ways to create a more beautiful home. Guests, inviting guests. But listen to your husband. Ask him what he thinks should be the priorities. And not in a way, and then say, and by the way, I think we now should add tzedakah, because then it becomes an agenda which will only be a turnoff. Okay, I hope that was helpful, and with that we shall conclude this week's program. Everyone, let's use Chof Beis Shevat to the fullest. Mishpatim, taking the Rebbetzin together with the Rebbe as partners that brought us such gifts, to take their gifts and turn them into assets that will help us transform this world and make Taka B'choy Yivarech Yisrael, Adir B'tachtena, Adir Noah, that permeated with chayas and mushke and aroma of Torah and mitzvahs, which is sometimes compared to the two. You talk about the Dalet Minim, you talk about Reach, as well as Tam V'Reach, Torah, mitzvahs, and transform this world, and finally have the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin back with us, Begashmias, the Geula Amitis Vashlema. Everyone have a very good week. It's Lochadika week. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. This has been My Life Chassidus Applied. Thank you so much.
This program is brought to you by My Life Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.